Well, I can tell by the energy in the room that there's been a lot for us to celebrate, to give thanks for the year that has just passed, and we're also going to turn the corner and take a look at what holds the future for us in 2025. Just want you to know that what I'm about to share in terms of this address is going to be video recorded, and it will be shared with the whole congregation as part of my midweek message later this week. This is all to say you are being video recorded, so be on your best behavior, because everyone's going to see what you do. Friends, I first of all want to thank you for agreeing to serve in your capacity of leadership for 2025. You all do, as I said, play a vital role in making God's love real in a wonderfully complex and beautiful vision of Christianity that we live into here at Hyde Park United Methodist. You will play a critical role in helping us to claim the bright future that God has for us in 2025. But first, I want to celebrate with you 2024, the year that we have just left. Since we have gathered here since last January, God has blessed this church and this community through us. Really, without your leadership, without your counsel, without your faithful offering of your time and your prayers and your presence and your financial generosity, we could not have experienced the overflow of abundance that God has given us this past year. Here's just a few highlights. We received over 120 new members into this church. We ended the year with another substantial surplus of income over budgeted expenses, allowing the Finance Committee to replenish our capital reserves, enabling our trustees to finally replace the air conditioning in the sanctuary and the Wesley Center. And a particular sweaty preacher gives you thanks for that. And the sizable surplus has made it feasible for the trustees to finally begin addressing long-awaited preventative maintenance on our sanctuary stained glass windows. Our stewardship campaign had its greatest response of financial generosity during my tenure here in the last 10 years. Despite the formidable challenges of having a commitment Sunday in the wake of major hurricanes, we received the highest total amount pledged that we've ever had, with an increase over last year of the number of first-time pledgers, an higher average amount pledged, and a higher number of people who increased their pledge over last year. This allowed the Finance Committee to propose a budget that was approved by you all last Sunday at the church conference that was an even slight increase over this past year, allowing for increases in property and liability insurance and raises for our staff. This, of course, on top of the fact that last August we paid off the remainder of our 25-year property debt, enabling us to be completely debt-free, thanks be to God. Thanks to our stellar worship teams, staff and volunteers, including musicians, hospitality, tech, and the countless lay people who offer their gifts in worship, our weekly worship attendance continues to grow, averaging 918 people every single week, both in person and online, on both campuses, Hyde Park and Portico. And, of course, the online service, which continues to broaden the reach of this church all around the country. We continue to hear from people all around the United States who are discovering this church through that online service. In fact, after the 11 o'clock worship today, someone stopped me in the courtyard to let me know that they introduced this church to their friends in Maryland who began watching on Christmas Eve. And though they have never been in person on this campus and may never be in person, they continue to watch us and join us in worship every single Sunday from Maryland. Our service to the unhoused continues to rise to meet the challenge of those most vulnerable in our area. Between the early morning Portico breakfast and the late morning open arms, we serve about 250 unhoused individuals every single week, thanks to the volunteer efforts of over 50 volunteers, many of you, I know, who serve each Sunday. Our campus has served as a cold weather shelter for several nights, providing upwards of 90 beds each night for those struggling with the cold. And the latest tally that I heard this morning is a grand total over this winter alone is close to 1,000 people who have had beds, who have been serviced and furnished in a safe and warm environment both here and at the portico. We continue our ministries to children and youth and adults through creative and consistent small group discipleship. We had a wonderful, yet again, a wonderful, successful Vacation Bible School and Youth Sunday and Youth Missions Week, and a growing number of adult small groups that have met throughout the year. In fact, I hope that you joined us last Sunday for our Journey of Service, in which about 25 missions partners and church ministries showcased their programs, solicited new interest, and new volunteers to engage in mission. In the area of congregational care, we continue to deploy an amazing team of clergy and lay people to care for those who are sick and homebound, thanks to Sally Campbell-Evans, and our newest addition to our care team, Parish Associate Bernie Leaving, who returned to our staff last August. The Primetimers continue great ministry to our senior adults, and our congregational care team has provided an amazing array of workshops and other programs for both our elderly and the people who care for them. And this has been a historic year for us as a local church and as a denomination. We celebrated our 125th anniversary with a memorable series of celebrations culminating on September 15th. And we experienced a historic moment in our denomination last May when our General Conference changed its official position on the inclusion of LGBTQ persons, allowing for the ordination of gay clergy and the performance of same-sex marriages. Following that change from General Conference and the now change to our Book of Discipline, our Board of Trustees last December followed the permission now granted by our discipline, voting to henceforth allow same-sex weddings to be performed on church properties, and we are grateful to them for their leadership. Since the days of the early church in Acts and all throughout the 2,000-year history of the church has been built on 4 pillars of ministry: worship, discipleship, fellowship, and service. Worship, discipleship, fellowship, and service. And I think you would agree that given all that we have been through together in 2024, we can fully affirm that this church is 4 for 4 in all these vital areas of church life. So what's ahead for 2025? Well, there are 2 aspects of our vision for the year ahead. You know, there's been a lot of commentary in our culture about the state of organized religion these days. A lot of doom and gloomers, a lot of statistics that suggest that with declines in worship attendance across the board, with declines in membership among both mainline and evangelical churches, there are a lot of people who are saying we are living in a time of widespread global decay. You add to that a lot of commentary about widespread deterioration of trust in our most basic institutions. Nearly every civic and governmental institution or field of expertise or system of information is suffering from a lot of mistrust from the general public, from segments of the wider population, resulting in greater isolation and nationalism around the world, and a deterioration of the very social fabric of this country. So these are all components that I believe frame our opportunities as Hyde Park United Methodist for the year ahead, particularly in 2 ways. Because the good news is, in the history of the church, in the history of the body of Christ for 2,000 years, we have seen unsettling times before. As Mark Twain once said, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So these times, as unsettling as they might feel, summon us to two callings in 2025, in keeping with the resilience demonstrated by the Church of Jesus all throughout its 2,000-year history. First, these times compel each of us to create and maintain our daily spiritual practices. Not simply as an act of personal piety, but as a daily act of resilience and defiance against the unsettledness of our time. In the early centuries of Christian history, when the Roman Empire was crumbling and all the basic institutions of Western civilization were deteriorating, in other words, back when history was rhyming, the times that we live in now, that is when a new voice emerged that would change the work and witness of the church forever. Benedict of Nursia, now commonly known as Saint Benedict, developed a rule of life. That's what it was called. A rule of life that became a new standard for a new way of being. A new way of being as a follower of Jesus and a new way of being as the church in the world. He defined a set of daily private and communal practices that Christians followed to create a community of listening and obedience and humility and generosity and most of all, stability, reliability in a world that was crumbling all around them. So this year, we are emphasizing spiritual practices, not just as an act of personal piety, but to create a new way of being. Not just doing, but being in the world, as unsettling as it is, as a defiant act of resilience and generosity and humility and empathy, basic humanity, made in the image of God, as a witness to the world. This world needs a reminder of what it means to be empathetic. This world needs a reminder of what it means to be curious and humble and generous and compassionate and courageous and filled with integrity. And from a Christian perspective, these are not just behaviors. These are not just things that we do. They are values that come from a certain way of being. And it is a way that is cemented in a diligent and faithful and constant pattern of daily living that comes from spiritual practices. That's why this is important. So that's why when we talk about the 7 practices of the disciples' path, we don't just say that they are there for personal improvement or for showing off holiness or for maintaining the institution of the church. It is so that we can create together a witness to the world of a different way of being in the world. To be a different life of loving and hope and just that people in the world are not going to see anywhere else but through us. As I shared with you in worship this morning, our worship series starting next Sunday is about reading the Bible. Our Lenten series is about connecting the work of the cross with acts of justice and compassion and reconciliation and peace. And over the summer, we're going to do a whole long series on prayer. And tonight, in just a few moments, I'll be introducing to you our guest speaker, who will talk to you about the importance of spiritual practices as United Methodists. And before you leave tonight, we will give you resources for you to begin developing a daily rhythm that you can work on. So the first component of our vision for 2025 is daily spiritual practices as a way of being in the world. But there's a second call that's upon us. It's also rooted in history, and we are uniquely equipped as a church to fulfill this important part of our calling. Throughout the history of the church, whenever the church has faced unsettling and uncertain times, whenever the church has faced the prospect of decline, it has instead flourished when it has followed 2 different but very parallel tracks. They are what I would call the cathedral and the communities. The cathedral and the communities. The cathedral model, you probably know well. It's well exhibited all throughout history. It's easily recognizable through sizable, magnificent cathedrals, worship spaces, and church campuses that began to be built around the Middle Ages. These cathedrals represent everything that we might associate with conventional ways of doing the work of the church: worship, discipleship, fellowship, and service. All of it based on this idea that you gather together in order to do the work of church. Cathedrals. And in many ways, right here at the corner of Platt and Magnolia, we have a marvelous model for cathedral ministry. I've actually even heard it said that our sanctuary is the Cathedral of South Tampa. What we offer here on the Hyde Park campus is all of what people have come to expect when it comes to conventional Christian programming. And as I just shared with you, we do it well. We do it really, really well. And it has helped us to flourish. But throughout the history of the church, it has not only been cathedral-style expressions of church that enabled it to flourish despite periods of social upheaval, because coming alongside has been a very different way of being the church outside the cathedrals, sometimes even outside the heart of the cities. And these took the form of intentional communities of Christians living together to form enclaves of spiritual practice and social service. Monks and nuns, clergy and laity, people from all walks of life would create what would come to be known by many different names: missionary societies, missional communities, monasteries, institutes, convents, or simply communities. Communities. These communities became places far removed and far different from the trappings of cathedral-style facilities, but they were where people gathered together to grow in their faith, to care for the poor, to improve the lives of people in their communities, to raise awareness of injustices and inequalities, to make the community around them better. These communities spread like wildfire all throughout Europe, through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and they grew exponentially in the 19th and 20th centuries. Communities where people gather to grow in their faith and meet basic needs of the people around them. So there are two ways of being the church throughout history: the cathedral and the communities, ensuring the flourishing of the Christian church through uncertain times. Both of these models are different, but they are both necessary. They are both interdependent. They are both connected to each other. And we, at Hyde Park United Methodist, are uniquely gifted and equipped with both models, with both campuses. Among the many things that excite me about Hyde Park United Methodist and its future, even amid the unsettling times that we live in today, is that our two campuses, Hyde Park and the Portico, we have both the cathedral and the community, side by side, ensuring both the vitality of our congregation and the transformation of the city around us. I know of very few other congregations in Florida and beyond who can claim the unique variety of these two campuses that fits right into the flow of the flourishing of the church throughout history: a cathedral and a community campus. As a result of our visioning process in 2018, this church determined that the Portico was not simply going to be a carbon copy of what we do on the Hyde Park campus, especially not with that campus being just 1.9 miles away. A carbon copy of the conventional kinds of ministries that we do here, but it would be about creating a community in the most historic sense of the term, a place where people from all walks of life engaged in deep relationship formation, in solidarity to address the needs of the city like homelessness and racial reconciliation, and attracting people who care about these same issues who would not otherwise want to step foot in a cathedral kind of campus. And we are seeing that week after week after week. People who are coming to Jesus, who've never been to this campus, but who have bought into Hyde Park because of what we're doing in that community. So just as we are grateful for the amazing work that we do on the Hyde Park campus, we can be just as grateful and proud of Justin and Bob and Lizzie and Heather, the whole Portico advisory team, the whole Portico leadership team, Mindy and the cafe team, and all the staff and all the volunteers who help steer the Portico really into a modern-day missional community, just as the church has experienced throughout history. And we look forward to the work that they are doing right now with our trustees to transform Branscombe Hall into the next expression of being a transforming force in our community. So, as your senior pastor, I am compelled by the vision of what 2025 will bring to us as a church as we do these two things together in this unique time in our history, in this unique time in the world. One, strengthen our spiritual practices as leaders in this congregation to model a different way of being as an act of resilience and courage in the world. And two, to live into the exciting vision of being both a cathedral and a community, vital and active, to make God's love real for all people. And if you are as excited about that future as I am, thanks be to God, and say amen. Amen. It is now my